Hey guys, how y'all doing? Well, before I start today's video, two things. One is the sunglasses because I probably had way too much cocktails last night. Two, there was this person who said that me being topless in my video was a bit inappropriate. Not a bit, she said it was inappropriate. No. I just want to make one thing clear. I've never met Kresley Cole before. I've never met her. Yet. But I'm sure if I did, she'd applaud me for being this fine and reading her stories at the same time. Okay. This was supposed to be a reading building exercise to get me to read better and better and better, but if you don't like it, then don't watch it. What can I say? Cheers. This is my recuperation drink, by the way. Bloody Mary. Cheers. So let's get started. Chapter 8. A nightmare was about to take her. When his fingers dug into her skin, dragging her beneath him, she knocked her forehead against his. He bellowed with rage until she squirmed around and dove her elbow back into his throat. As he fought for beneath, she took advantage by scrambling from him enough to mule kick his chest, sending him reeling. Why hadn't she broken his neck with her elbow through his throat? She had before with other vampires. Why did she hesitate whenever it came to hurting him? She wouldn't again, she thought, as she leapt on top of him, drilling her fist into his face so quickly it was like a blur. His lip split, another 2 hits in rapid succession. She thought she broke his cheekbone. "You'll get no mercy now," he bit out, his eyes black, his deep voice rumbling almost unrecognizably. He caught her fist when she struck again and squeezed. With her other hand, she swept her claws down his shirt, across his neck, hissing in fury. Lightning came down like a hail of bullets. Somehow, he caught her free wrist and turned over on her, pinning her hands above her head. Just as she tensed to kick her leg straight between his and sent him flying forward, he groaned as if in desperation, sinking his teeth deep into her neck. She shuddered and cried out, her body going limp beneath him. Her eyes widened in shock as she stared at the lightning above. This wasn't pain he was giving her. His bite was ecstasy. He did it again and again, lower on her neck. Each bite, each time his fangs entered her skin was like the thrust of a man inside her. Each time he realized her skin was like a slow, measured withdrawal. The pleasure was dizzying, exquisite agony. She never been defeated before in a contest of 2. No man had ever been strong enough. And Mist had an animal instinct, an animal need deep inside her for a powerful male. Like this one, would pleasured her, fascinated her, to win. Her mind rebelled, reminding her of what he was. She'd killed the last three she'd blooded. Why not him? He'd planned to torture her in that horrid dungeon, planned to control her with the chain. But his bite, it made her body demand, growing wetter, feeling empty without him, shoved tightly inside her. Please be strong enough. Please, for once in her life, would a man take control so she could finally lose it? When he pinned her wrists with one hand, hard, she arched her back in delight. He used his other to rip open her shirt, her bra, and bare her breasts. He palmed her flesh, then opened her jeans and freed himself. His huge erection jutted between them, the sack heavy beneath. Her eyes widened, and she fought anew, digging her heels into the ground to scuttle back. Too large for her. Break her in slowly? That's what he'd said. His palms landed with a slap on her upper thighs, lifting her pelvis. Her hands loose, her head dubbed back. She rose up and fought him viciously. Oh my God. His palms landed with a slap on her upper thighs, lifting her pelvis. Her hands loose. She rose up and fought him viciously, scattered, bit, hit, but it was futile. Still clasping her thighs, he used his thumbs to spread her sex, then wrenched her down on his shaft. Yelling brutally as she cried out in pain, he buried himself into her flesh until he was thick and throbbing deep within her. He'd done it. Miss will want this man, the first man who could defeat her. That's what they'd always whispered about her. They'd been right. She challenged him, and he bested her. In her mind, he deserved to claim his prize, no matter the consequences. He stilled, then bent his head to her and dragged his tongue over her nipple, as if to soothe her, as if, somewhere in his crazed mind, he wondered and wanted her to have pleasure. He sent her other nipple in pleasure for long moments, then sucked from her neck again. Somehow the bite turned pain to pleasure, helping her body grow slick to accept the invitation. She yanked the remains of his shirt open to sweep her fingers over his splendid chest, and that helped as well. As he slowly withdrew, he groaned, so wet. Then when he thrust again, she hissed in a breath, eyes watering. Roth, it really hurts, she whispered. Can't stop, he said, his neck and his chest sheened with sweat, his muscles rigid from his effort already. Tell me not to feel pain. Ah, mist, don't hurt. His words were ragged. I don't want you to feel pain from this. Immediately, the pain muted to only a feeling of fullness. When he drank from her, pulled back his hips, then tentatively thrust. She cried out again. He stiffened. No, Roth. It's good. Keep going. And so he did. He timed each draw from her neck with the bucking of his hips, and she knew it was over. Gave herself up to it, arched her back, her arms overhead. The lightning whipped up the wind, and it rushed over her heated body, over her tight nipples. He raised his chest up, positioning himself on his knees. She whimpered when she thought he would withdraw, but he dragged her up with him until she was straddling him. He spread his knees so he could thrust up inside her. He was getting too large to move within her, already hitting the end of her sex, so she couldn't take him to the hilt. His body was so bigger on hers, making her feel truly vulnerable. As if he read her mind, he wrapped his arm tight around her, pinning hers to her side. He completely captured her to hold her in place while he drove deep into her from below. She relaxed every muscle in her body. I mean, why not? This was a position she had never allowed before. From with there was no fighting, even if she'd wished to. She knew he wouldn't let her go or allow her to fall. She relaxed in the crushing tightness of his arms, her naked breasts pressed against his scarred chest. He kept her immobile while he continued to fuck like a piston below them. Her head fell back, and she watched the sky in daze of pleasure, seeing her own lightning thrashing the earth. Bliss welling up, strengthening, so close. Missed, he growled, releasing her neck. She thought he would order her to come, thought he was tightening his arms even more as if to threaten her should she disobey, but he didn't. Melia, I want you so much. Melia, the endearment for years ago said in his accent, sent her over the edge. She cried out from the shattering pleasure, but it only built when he desperately wrenched her up and down in his shaft as he tensed to come. Groaning, snarling, another bite that made her shudder in her second orgasm. Then he threw his head back, neck and chest tensed with corded muscle, to bellow from the force of his spending. She felt it inside her, searing, palpable, seeming endless as he pumped and pumped within her. She came the entire time, and her body squeezing around his thickness. Then, after shudders, arms loosening, though she didn't want them to. She didn't want this to end. When his breaths had calmed somewhat, he drew her back to search her face. Her eyes had cleared. I didn't want to hurt you, he rasped. I didn't. Your neck, he said in a shocked tone, staring. She brushed her forefingers over her marks. It didn't hurt. Even before you, we worked it out. They were nothing and would be healed by tomorrow. You've really never seen this before, have you? Never. I was your first bite? Why that would please her, she had no clue. Why she wasn't leaping away from him in disgust confused her. She was just so overwhelmed with everything, and she felt tenderness towards him. Yes, Miss had always been the girly girl of the coven, but she'd never in her long life felt truly feminine until this male had squeezed her in the arms and taken charge. She had never, in all the lifetimes she'd endured, experienced that much pleasure. I've never taken flesh to drink because I knew what it would do to me. He rested his forehead against hers. Mist, my eyes will go red from this. I will turn. He looked horrified. The words slipped out. Your eyes will only go red when you drink living blood. The ones whose eyes turn drink to the marrow of their victims' wrath, sucking from the pit, from the soul. They take all the bad, the madness, and all the sins. His jaw slackened. Is that why pure pleasure? Is that why pure-blooded vampires go mad? She shook her head. It's more than that. They get addicted to killing, which means they can drink from the same source. After years and years of different victims, let's just put it this way, the memories add up. He cupped his head behind hers. Every sunset, it checked my eyes, not sure if I would turn from your blood, not knowing if my brothers would have to kill me. His tone wasn't reapproaching, but hell, could she feel more guilty? This male was still inside her body that was humming as she'd never even known it could. And she'd tortured him. Wrath, you're a vampire. Others might not agree, but for one, I believe that you're meant to drink, to connect, to live, but never to kill like that. And it takes decades of killing every day for the memories to accumulate. In a stunned voice, he said, I won't turn. I'm meant to drink. His lips curled, and he stroked her hair, still supporting her with one arm. He would never let her go. He's bested me. She shivered. And you found pleasure in it. It wasn't a question, but she answered. Your back was the only thing that saved you from a stiff-legged kick in your groin. Then he grinned. She added softly, it was intense pleasure. He groaned in approval and thrust into her once more, still while semi-hard. To her surprise, she moaned. Desire stoked again. Did I take too much? He asked, still on his knees. He laid her back until she was horizontal, secure in his arms. One hand cupped her head, the other clutching under her shoulder as he pulled her along his length in a long, strong stroke. Her eyes fluttered close, and she answered without thought. Immortal hair, remember? He stopped suddenly, brought her back into his chest, arms around her, protective once more. I heard something. It's nothing. Frustrated, she kicked him in the ass with her heels, rocking on him. He stiffed and groaned, but didn't thrust in her. When she opened her eyes, she found his gaze, furious, and focused on the sword, point tucked under his chin. Regan was pressing. Oh, Regan is there. I love that girl. Regan was pressing hard enough to bring blood trickling down. Lucia stood at her side with an arrow nocked. No, Miss said, her voice sounding hoarse from screaming. Don't. Regan stared at her in disbelief. Regan, whose entire race had been destroyed by vampires, and who had secretly learned to count by her mother's bite scars. This thing just violated you. We followed the lightning here, Regan, Lucia interrupted. Whatever he did to her, she let him do. She couldn't imagine what they looked like there in the field. They'd fought ruthlessly. They must be bruised, bloody, their clothing in shreds. Why hadn't he traced her away? Why hadn't he thrown her out of the way and attacked Regan? She suspected the answer to the first. Though he wanted them to see her like this, their relationship couldn't be made more brutally clear. She pulled away from him. His arms tightened around her to prevent it. Please, Roth, she whispered in his ear. Let me face them. He finally released her. But jealous Mist didn't want her sisters to see Roth hard, huge and magnificent. She pulled her skirt over them as she drew him free from her, then yanked his shirt tail down. That's mine, she thought irrationally. She'd been acquisitive all her life, but never with men. Now she wanted possession. When Miss stumbled away, Roth reached for her, but Regan raised her sword against him, piercing several inches into his chest muscle. He didn't fight back. He could hardly feel it, and he had vowed not to harm her family. He was euphoric. There stood his bride, putting her chin up as she pulled her shirt closed. Claimed. He stifled an evil grin. With witnesses. She could never go back now. She was his. His heart pumped madly for her, his blood rushing inside him, and her luscious blood as well. She'd enjoyed his bite. Lightning had streaked the sky each time that she came. He'd seen her pleasure. He could give her lightning each time he drank, without fear of turning, without fear of hurting her. No more checking his eyes each sunset. They could sustain each other. He'd never known greater satisfaction. Now, if he could just get her, witch of a sister, to cease stabbing him. Gosh. You just had sex with a vampire, Lucia said. Mist, where is your mind? You know the repercussions. You'll be shunned by the lore, mistrusted. Regan added in a deadened tone. When fury rises. Whatever that statement meant, it made Mist's brows suddenly draw together. She appeared shocked by everything, as if her sister's arrival splashed ice water over her, waking her from a dream. He needed to get her home, away from them. Suddenly Regan gasped, and stared at Mist in horror. "Oh, sweetheart," she whispered. "Where's your chain?" "Quickly," Roth snapped to Mist as he reached for her. "Take my hand." Mist obeyed, diving forward to take it. He traced them just as Regan leapt for Mist's legs, and an arrow sang for him, hitting him in the shoulder, but not staying within him as it disappeared. Back to Blackmont, he set Mist on the edge of the bed. "Stay here," he ordered, then returned for the goddamn bag he'd gone to get in the first place. Just as he had arrived in her room, Regan and Lucia bolted up the stairs. "Give her chain back, you leech!" "I've claimed her. She's my wife now," he said simply, then traced with an ease he'd never had, covering the distance as if just an afterthought. Back home, he tossed her things to the side, then took her shoulders. "Rest, Amelia. Take a bath and relax here until I return." She didn't respond, and he didn't want to leave her unsteady from the tracing and reeling from the events of the night. But he needed to let Kristoff know that Ivo was in the New World. They needed to hunt him down and destroy him. As Roth gazed down at his bride, he wondered how Ivo could not be searching for her. He brushed her hair from her face, trying to get her eyes to meet his. "Make yourself comfortable here. Your clothes are here. This is your home now." When she nodded absently, her pupils were huge, her eyes stark, and he knew he couldn't leave her like this. He would warm her with a bath and put her to bed. He ran water, undressed her, and set her in it. She sat silently as he scrubbed the dirt and grass from her alabaster skin and held a cloth to her neck, to the bites that marred her. Suddenly, she turned to him and placed her hands on his face. "Roth, you said you would vow never to hurt my family." "Yes, and I'd make it again." "I believe you. You could have traced and attacked Regan and Lucia tonight, and you didn't. But please, please, if you take memories from this night, don't give others our weaknesses. Don't allow others to hurt them either." Was his first loyalty to his king or to her? She was his bride, and as he stared into her eyes, he realized that meant she was his family. Roth's family had always come first, and nothing had changed except that now he'd added to it. "If I learn of other factions, I will relay that information, but never about your kind." She pulled him to her and kissed him softly with trembling lips. "Thank you. Thank you so much, Roth," she whispered against him. Then she gave him a shaky smile that made his turned heart do things he'd never remember from being a human once before. Her shoulders tensed just as he heard voices sounding from downstairs. Trespassers in his home. His fangs had sharpened. That someone would dare enter his home when he had his bride within it? Mist, finish up, then go to the bedroom and wait for me. If anyone comes through that door and it's not me, run faster than you ever run and escape them. Do you understand? He traced downstairs. What the hell? Okay. Lost the page. Why does that always happen? My apologies. He traced downstairs, feeling his muscles tensing, his hands itching to kill. He was drawn from her, immortal blood, taken directly from the flesh, as powerful as he'd ever imagined, and he would use it to protect her. His fangs were sharp as razors. Wrath, I pity the being who wishes to harm your bride. Kristoff intoned from his seat at a long table in the great room. Murdoch and a couple of elders sat with him, and all their eyebrows rose to his appearance. As he struggled for control, he imagined how they saw him. His clothing was filthy, his shirt was stabbed and shot through, and God help him, Miss Delicious scent of blood marked his skin and clothing. He was fairly certain that she'd gotten in a few sucker punches at his face as well. I would not wish to attend to you in such a condition, my king. I'll go wash and change. No, we know you're eager to get back to her from the remains of the night. Kristoff appeared proud. Congratulations, Roth. You've now been blooded and claimed your bride. He studied him. Recently, though it appears she didn't acquiesce to you. Roth stood, uncomfortable, reminding himself that she'd kicked him like she would spur a horse when he'd stopped. I'd like to meet her. She is resting. I suppose she would be. In fact, I'd wonder if she wasn't. A couple of snickers. Roth shot them a look and they quitted. And you drank her blood this night? His eyes narrowed. How had he thought that this would escape Kristoff's notice? Did you take her flesh as you did so? He could do nothing but admit to the most heinous crime among his order. Shoulders back, he stood tall and said, I did. Take off your shirt. Murdoch caught his glance, tensing to fight, but Kristoff simply waved him down, saying, Stand down, Murdoch. No one's dying tonight. Perhaps Kristoff would only flail his skin from his back. Roth removed the shirt, hoping. For the first time in his life, he had his wife waiting for him, and for the first time in his life, he really and truly cared if he lived or died. Toss it on the table. Frowning, he did. The elder's eyes widened, their hands going white on the table. Kristoff had scented Mist's blood, and now the others did as well. And what was it like, Roth? Murdoch asked, his voice going hoarse. Roth didn't answer. Then Christoph raised his eyebrow in a silent order. At a moment, Roth grated. There is no description strong enough. And how did she feel about your bite? Christoph asked. He didn't want them to know how she reacted to that, how it made her come with an intensity that had staggered him. Christoph's stare was unflinching. You resist answering your king on the heels of confessing to a most reviled crime? This was his bride they spoke of. He wanted to lie, to say he wasn't sure, or that he didn't know, and he couldn't. Answering this wouldn't be breaking his vow to her, and if Christoph ordered him killed, he couldn't protect Mist from Ivu. Though it disgusted him, he bit out. She found it extreme pleasure. She found extreme pleasure from it. Ugh. Christoph appeared pleased, even revealed, even relieved. Do you think I should forgive Roth of his transgression? For which of us could have resisted the temptation when she was our bride and her exquisite blood called? What do you gentlemen think? Roth hid his shocked expression. Christoph would have normally called for him to be chained in an open field until the sun burned him to ash. Continue as you were, but if your eyes turn, Roth, know that we will destroy you. He was still staring at the shredded garment marked by a Valkyrie's blood. Roth recovered enough to say, I was coming to a block tonight to tell you that Ivor was spotted in New Orleans. He's looking for someone and I suspect it could be Mist. I need to... We'll take care of it, Murdoch interrupted sharply. For God's sake, you stay here and enjoy everything. Find out as much as you can from her. Christoph eyed him shrewdly as he stood to leave. And you would tell us if the memories follow the blood. A short, quick nod as Roth left the room. Stunned from the events, he heard Christoph say, Now, which one of you will volunteer to accompany Murdoch to New Orleans where this coven of Valkyrie is located? Roth heard every chair scrape the floor as they all stood on their feet. Like a cat licking her wounds, Mist sat at the large bath, replaying the fight. Since she'd pulled her punches, she wondered if she could have won, wondered if she'd truly been bested. But then she flexed the fingers of the fist he'd caught. They were sore. They were not broken, but they were sore. So she's guessing he held back as well. She sighed, unable to work up the outrage that should be exploding within her, or even concerned over the possible threat downstairs. Roth would take care of it. He was strong. She shrugged, her mind easily turning to tonight's stunning developments. Now her sisters knew her chain was gone, and that she'd been claimed by a vampire. What they couldn't know was how much she'd loved it. His bite had turned her inside out and made her toes curl. Even now, she shivered thinking about it, knowing something was woefully wrong with her for craving it. It might be twisted, but she yearned for him to do it to her all over again and again. In addition to that, Roth had taken her as no other had before. Though she acted as if she'd had tons of lovers, she actually only had a couple of steady partners. She'd once dated a wonderful warlock for centuries, but it was long distance. In those days, it took half a year to reach the other, and they'd parted ways amicably. She only slept with two others, both again long term, and they'd been fun and enjoyable. But she'd seen a lot and knew a lot, and she knew Roth moved and used his body on hers, in hers, in ways that was nothing short of divine, and she believed that would only get better. She shivered again, unable to imagine how she could feel more pleasure without dying. Then there was a very compelling fact. He'd unchained her where none other could. Did that mean he was supposed to have it? To have her? Was he supposed to possess her, to command her like a genie within a bottle? She'd always pitied the plight of genies until once she'd freed one from a young berserker. Instead of thanks, the chit had laid into her, screaming, "To each her own, lightning whore." After Miss dried off, she dressed in an emerald green, understated nightgown that said neither "do me" nor did it say "do not do me." She laid back in his bed, realizing she was just so relaxed about everything. Strange. But she felt so at home in this cold, bare mansion. Less than half an hour later, he returned and showered. There'd been no threat. Probably his brothers just visiting in time to see Roth looking like she'd fought him for her life. He should see when she didn't pull her punches. When Roth joined her, she wondered if he was going to make love to her again. Their time in the field had only set fire for her, like a pilot light, so to speak, and it had never been lit before. She was sore, but if he commanded her not to hurt her again, yet the only clasp her into his arms to rest his chest. She saw he was hard, but still he made no advancements towards her. Finally, he curled a finger under her chin and raised her face to his. He drew her hair back to relieve her bite marks. To reveal, not relieve, sorry. He let her hair fall, then stared at the ceiling, rumbling the words. "I'll regret hurting you, miss. The number of bites, the lack of care before." She knew what he meant by the latter. He regretted not taking time to prepare her body and ease into her. When she thought about how he'd learned to do this, or thought about the time he'd ever realized that he would even need to, she felt a scorching flare of jealousy, so strong it rocked her. Jealous. Why would she be jealous when he could never want another but her for the rest of his life? I couldn't believe it. I lost control like that. I am unused to being blooded. I am unused to being a husband. But I vow that things will be different. I will be gentler. That statement was the first thing to threaten her lackadaisical mood since she'd returned here. She didn't want their sex to be different. Their sex, oh great Freya. Was she thinking about keeping him? She would get used to his size, and then she would demand that he be anything but gentle. She couldn't have ordered up anything much better than having him on her in bed, and she'd be damned if she let him hold back all that magnificent strength. He was everything she had ever dreamed of physically, his scars alone. Still, she stifled a moan, but her claws were curling. He was a warrior, with a warrior's mentality, which she had appreciated. None of her lovers before had been warriors. None at all. No, they'd been a warlock, an immortal sultan, and then an architect. Perhaps that was why she was so attracted to Wrath. She and Wrath were kindred. "Speak to me," he commanded, then immediately amended. "Will you not speak to me? I want my chain back. I want to choose." If he gave it to her, she would stay a while. Her sisters had already seen her being screwed by a vampire. She might as well enjoy the pleasure for a time. He moved to his side, pressing her to his as well. There they lay, gazes locked. Dawn was nearing, and she didn't want this to end for some time. He put his hand on her shoulder and stroked her. His palm was rough from hardships and the grief of his sword. From hardships and the grip of his sword. And she relished the feel of it. "I can't lose you. The very thought makes me crazed, Mist. I can't even allow myself to imagine you leaving me." His hand squeezed her now. "Are you certain I would?" she asked. "Yes, I am," he rasped. His tone wasn't blaming, but more like he was explaining something regrettable, but inevitable. And Mist didn't deny it, because he was probably right. He called himself her husband, but she didn't recognize him as such. She didn't recognize him as the one whose arms she would forever run to get within. She might stay for a time, but in the end, she would always go. That's the end of chapter 8. I'll see you guys the next time for chapter 9. Until then, take care. Bye.